Okay, let's jump in. We are doing a deep dive today into the sources covering day 9 of this Sean Diddy Combs trial.
Right. And the goal here is really to take all this material. We have the witness statements, reports, court records from that day, and sort of sift through it.
Exactly. Pull out what was actually presented, what the key points were from these sources, not adding our own opinions, just focusing on the source material.
And it's quite a mix of sources for this specific day, isn't it?
It really is. You've got testimony from a musician, a former employee, a makeup artist,
Yeah, even a hotel manager and a computer forensics expert. So lots of different angles.
which means trying to piece together what happened, well, it takes some careful reading of these sources.
And that's what we're here for, to help you make sense of what these specific sources presented from the day's proceedings.
So first up, the sources really focused heavily on the rapper Kid Cudi. Scott Mescudi is his real name.
Mm-mm. He testified about a relationship he had with Cassie Ventura back in 2011. It was brief.
And the timing is key here, right?
Yeah.
What did the sources say he believed about her status with Combs?
He testified he thought Cassie and Combs were separated at that point. That's what the sources know.
Okay. And his testimony, according to these sources, laid out some pretty disturbing events that he claims happened after Combs found out about them.
Yeah, it gets quite specific. He talked about getting a call from Cassie, sounding distressed.
And then this alleged break-in at his place in Hollywood Hills,
Mm.
December 2011. What details did the sources pull out about that?
Well, the sources detail his account.
Yeah.
He gets home, security cameras moved, not working, Christmas gifts opened.
Wow.
And maybe the weirdest part, his dog was locked in a bathroom. He said it made the dog permanently jittery afterward.
Yeah. And the sources mentioned he texted Diddy about it.
They do, saying something like, Diddy broke into my house, messed with my dog. That specific detail about the dog, it definitely stands out in the source material.
It really does. It adds this very personal, almost a violating element to the alleged events highlighted in the sources.
Then, just weeks later, January 2012, his Porsche 911 Cabriolet.
Set on fire
Yeah.
in his driveway. He described the damage
Yeah.
and mentioned a Molotov cocktail.
Exactly. The sources quote him identifying that. And they say the car was a complete write-off, beyond repair.
And this connects to earlier testimony, doesn't it? Cassie had apparently testified Combs threatened to blow up Kid Cudi's car.
Right. So the sources suggest the prosecution is trying to tie this alleged arson directly into the racketeering charge, part of a pattern.
Makes sense. Law enforcement did respond. He filed a report. But the sources also cover the cross-examination.
Yeah, and the defense pointed out, according to the sources, that Kid Cudi admitted he never actually heard back from police about fingerprints or anything solid.
And he conceded there was nothing directly placing Combs or his people near his house when the fire happened.
So that raises that question, about the direct link in the evidence presented in these sources.
Kid Cudi also testified, didn't he, about setting up a meeting with Combs the day after the fire at Soho House.
He did. Wanted to, in his words, squash a beef. He felt Combs was involved, though that specific comment was struck from the record for the jury.
And in that meeting, the sources say he directly asked Combs about burning his car.
Yeah, and Combs apparently just denied knowing anything about it. Kid Cudi testified he felt Combs was lying.
And that's when we get that description the sources highlighted. Combs acting like a Marvel supervillain.
Uh-huh. Standing, staring out the window, hands behind his back. It's a very vivid image from the testimony provided in the sources.
He also explained why his relationship with Cassie ended, according to the sources.
Said the drama was too out of hand, feared for their safety. He mentioned knowing Combs was allegedly violent, that Cassie had told him about being hit and kicked.
But then on cross-examination, the defense, based on the sources, seemed to really focus on Cassie's credibility.
They did. Suggested she was living two different lives, had played both men, implying she wasn't straight about her relationship status.
And the sources note Kid Cudi actually agreed she had played them.
He did agree with that specific point, according to the source material. The defense also brought up that his door was unlocked during the alleged break-in. No structural damage.
So you can really see the defense strategy emerging in the sources.
Yeah,
Chip away at witness credibility, offer alternative ways to look at things.
definitely. And the sources also mention Kid Cudi saw Combs years later, again at Soho House.
Oh, right, and Combs apparently apologized for all that bullshit. Cudi said it brought him peace.
Yeah, quite an interaction described there. The sources also painted him as a pretty unique witness. Casual attire, smoked a cigarette walking in, yawned a few times, testified for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Okay, so moving on from Kid Cudi. The sources then cover George Kaplan, Combs' a former personal assistant he started the day before, under immunity.
Right. Kaplan's testimony, according to the sources, touched on handling large amounts of cash for Diddy, sometimes like $50,000 or $10,000 instances.
And he also talked about witnessing violence between Combs and Cassie.
Yes, he described it as regular physical violence. Based on the source reports, he gave specific examples.
Like on the private jet to Vegas, hearing glass break, seeing Combs standing over Ventura with a whiskey glass.
Mm-hmm. And another time, seeing injuries on her face after an incident at Combs' L.A. home. The sources detail these accounts.
And he mentioned Combs throwing decorative apples at another girlfriend, Gina. That was the last straw for him.
Apparently so. He stated, as reported in the sources, he quit because he wasn't comfortable with the physical behavior.
But then, on cross-examination, the sources show a more complicated picture of his time working for Combs.
Yeah, he called it the hardest he'd ever worked, one of the most complicated things in his life. Said Combs pushed him, but he was proud of the work.
Called Combs' energy infectious, inspirational, but acknowledged his temper hurt the business.
And interestingly, the sources note he said he still sends Combs birthday wishes, has respect for him. He made it clear he didn't want to testify, was subpoenaed.
That definitely adds complexity, doesn't it? How the sources present his feelings. He also apparently talked about Combs' relationship with Kim Porter.
And described Combs' world back then, 2013 to 2015, as being like a god among men, his world the size of Earth.
Quite a description. Okay, after the lunch break, the sources say celebrity makeup artist Mila Morales took the stand.
Right. She's known Cassie for a long time, since 2007, considers her like a little sister.
And she testified about an incident back in 2010, Grammy weekend, Beverly Hills Hotel.
She did. According to the sources, she described hearing screaming, a commotion, Combs apparently storming into a suite looking for Cassie, yelling, "Where the heck is she?"
And when she saw Cassie afterward.
The sources report Morales testified Cassie had a swollen eye, busted lip, knots on her head, said she feared for her life.
And Cassie didn't want to go to the ER or call police, afraid of Combs.
That's what Morales testified, according to the sources. A doctor friend apparently examined Cassie and did recommend the ER.
Now, the defense challenged her too, right? The sources mentioned that.
Yes, on cross-examination, they pointed out she only heard the argument, didn't see the physical part.
And they brought up her TV appearances, documentaries about the case, implying she was seeking attention.
Exactly. The sources say she conceded she was attention-seeking, but stated she only got paid $1,000 for photos, not for interviews.
Okay. Then the sources shift focus to the general manager of the Ilera Hotel, Frederick Zemmour.
His testimony, based on the sources, was mainly about hotel logs, records related to Combs' stays there.
And these logs showed Combs stayed there often using a bunch of different names.
Yeah, the sources highlight names like Jackie Starr, Frank White, Frank Black, Ryan Lopez listed on his account.
Interesting, the aliases. And there were other notes in the logs, too, about spills and cleaning.
Yes, the sources mention system notes saying Combs always spills candle wax on everything and uses excessive amounts of baby oil,
requiring rooms to be flagged for deep cleaning. And the sources connect this how?
Well, the sources covering today's session note that details like the baby oil and candle wax seem to align with descriptions of alleged freak-offs mentioned by other witnesses previously.
Okay, so drawing connections there. And finally, the sources covered testimony from Special Agent Joshua Croft, Homeland Security, Computer Forensics.
Right. He examined 3 MacBooks belonging to Cassie, said they each had unique challenges.
And here's where things potentially link up again, according to the sources. You have the hotel manager mentioning the alias Frank Black.
And then Agent Croft finds that exact name, Frank Black, as a user profile on one of Cassie's computers seized by investigators.
The sources seem to really highlight that potential connection across different pieces of evidence.
Definitely. And Croft confirmed, the sources note, that Cassie gave permission for the search and a warrant was obtained for that specific computer profile.
The sources also mentioned Combs had devices seized, too.
Yes, numerous electronic devices from his homes were mentioned as seized in the sources.
So looking ahead, what do the sources say about timing? Trial continues after the holiday weekend.
That's right, picking back up Tuesday, May 27th, and the judge told jurors he expects things to wrap up by July 4th.
Any indication in the sources about upcoming witnesses?
They mentioned Capricorn Clark, connected to that alleged Kid Cudi break-in, plus LAPD and LAFD members.
And there was some discussion reported in the sources, outside the jury's hearing, about evidence. Like photos of Cassie.
Yeah, about their relevance and potential prejudice. The prosecution argued against showing certain photos, worried about stereotyping. The judge allowed some public event photos, but not others, according to the sources.
Which, as the sources present it, kind of ties back to that defense strategy, right?
Yeah.
Questioning credibility, maybe trying to frame things more as domestic issues rather than a larger criminal enterprise.
Exactly. That seems to be a consistent theme highlighted in the sources covering the defense's approach.
So wrapping up day 9 based on these sources, it's a real mix, isn't it? From Kid Cudi and Kaplan's very personal, intense accounts.
To the logistical stuff from the hotel logs, the digital forensics findings, a wide spectrum of information presented.
It really underscores, looking just at the sources, how complex it is to build a clear narrative from such different viewpoints and types of evidence.
Absolutely. And seeing the defense, as detailed in the sources, consistently trying to challenge witness accounts and offer different interpretations during cross-examination.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. How do these varied perspectives, as presented in the sources today, shape your understanding?
Consider the details that stick out: the dog, the supervillain comment, the mixed feelings from the ex-assistant, the alleged injuries, those hotel notes, the computer profile name.
How much weight do you give each piece when they're all presented together like this?
Yeah, just think about how those specific details from these sources contribute to the overall picture presented on day 9 of this trial. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping right into the Sean Diddy Combs trial, specifically day 9.
Yeah, D9. It was quite something.
We've been looking through a whole bunch of reports: People.com, Sky News, Mixvale, CBS, AP, BBC, Global News, NBC New York.
Right, and the Law and Crime Network, Scandal on YouTube, too. Lots of coverage.
It's interesting, seeing how they all cover the same stuff, but maybe with slightly different emphasis?
Mm-hmm.
Different angles.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key details, the stuff that really stood out from day 9's testimony.
Trying to piece together what these accounts might mean for the trial, the allegations against Combs.
Exactly. We're focusing on the testimony, the evidence presented, not taking sides, just looking at what was said.
And Combs, just as a reminder for everyone, he's facing those federal charges: sex trafficking, racketeering, all stemming from allegations, particularly Tassie Ventura's lawsuit about abuse and these freak-offs.
Yeah, the freak-offs. Serious stuff. Okay, let's get into it. What struck me about day 9 was how different accounts seemed to, mesh on certain points, despite coming from different people, different perspectives.
Absolutely. Let's start with Kid Cudi. Scott Miscudi, that's his real name.
Right. Famous musician. His connection is through Cassie Ventura, Combs' ex. They had a brief relationship.
And Cassie had already testified, remember, that Combs wasn't happy about that relationship, allegedly threatened to blow up Cudi's car.
Yeah, and Cudi's testimony seemed to back that up directly. He talked about being with Cassie over Christmas 2011 in Connecticut.
And Combs apparently reached out multiple times then.
That's what Miss Cudi said. Suggests Combs knew where they were, what was going on, establishes a timeline,
Okay, but then it gets, stranger. Miss Cudi talked about coming home after that Christmas.
Finding his security cameras moved, that's unsettling.
Right. And gifts opened on the counter. But the detail that really jumps out, and this is like, his dog was locked in the bathroom.
Wow. Yeah, that's personal.
Miss Cudi apparently told Combs later, "You broke into my house and messed with my dog. I don't want to talk to you." Hitting the dog part really personalizes it.
It really does. But, the defense had their turn. Cross-examination.
Standard procedure. What did they focus on?
They got Miss Cudi to acknowledge he'd left the door unlocked and that there wasn't any, structural damage. Forced entry wasn't proven.
Okay, so the defense is planting that seed of doubt. Maybe it wasn't Combs. Maybe it wasn't a forceful break-in.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Trying to weaken that link.
Yeah.
But then things escalated.
Yeah, the car incident, January 2012, right?
Miss Cudi testified his Porsche was firebombed in his driveway. Got a call from his dog watcher.
And the description of the damage sounds bad.
Yeah. Slashed roof, burnt driver's side, smoke damage, a hole cut in the roof.
And a Molotov cocktail inside.
In the driver's seat, yeah. His reaction was basically, what the, And then thinking, okay, I need to talk to Combs.
A Molotov cocktail takes it to another level. That's not just vandalism.
Definitely suggests premeditation, serious intent. But again, the defense pushed back on cross-examination.
Let me guess, no direct proof Combs was there.
Exactly. Cudi had to admit there was no hard evidence putting Combs or his people near the property at that specific time. Crucial point for the defense, obviously. Reasonable doubt.
So did Cudi confront Combs?
He did. Said they met at Soho House in Hollywood.
And how did that go?
Cudi's description was memorable. Said Combs was like a Marvel supervillain.
A supervillain? How so?
Just really calm. Which Cudi found super weird, unsettling, given his car had just been firebombed.
Yeah, you'd expect some reaction, right?
You'd think.
Yeah.
But when Cudi asked about the car, Combs apparently just said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Flat denial.
Huh. And Cudi said he didn't have issues with anyone else at the time.
Right. Making the implication pretty clear from his perspective.
That supervillain comment, though, paints a picture, doesn't it? Maybe detached, maybe controlling.
It definitely adds to the narrative the prosecution might be trying to build. But there's another twist.
Oh.
Years later, another encounter. Soho House again? Cudi was there with his daughter this time.
Okay.
And Combs apparently came up to him and apologized. Said something like, "Man, I just want to apologize for all that bullshit."
Wow. An apology. Years later.
Yeah. Cudi said it was unexpected, and it actually gave him a sense of peace.
That's interesting. An admission. Or just smoothing things over.
Well,
hard to say.
Exactly. It adds complexity. How do you interpret that apology now?
Cudi also touched on why he and Cassie broke up, didn't he?
He did. Said the drama was too out of hand. Feared for their safety because of Combs' alleged violence.
Did he say Cassie told him things?
Yeah, he testified that Cassie told him Combs would hit and kick her, which lines up with her own testimony, of course.
So his testimony kind of reinforces the idea that Combs' alleged actions created this wider circle of fear.
Right. It wasn't just contained to his direct relationship with Cassie, according to these accounts.
But the defense had one more angle with Cudi, right? About Cassie.
Ah, yes. They suggested Cassie might have been playing both Diddy and Cudi, living two lives.
And Cudi.
He actually agreed with that characterization, said she had been living two different lives.
Ooh, that could be significant for the defense, undermining Cassie's credibility.
Absolutely. If they can paint her as dishonest or manipulative, it weakens her entire testimony and potentially the testimony of others supporting her claims. Standard defense tactic, but potentially effective if the jury buys it.
Okay, let's shift gears. Mila Morales, the makeup artist.
Right. She worked with Cassie from when Cassie was really young, like 16, and then regularly after she signed with Bad Boy in 2007.
Said she saw Cassie like a little sister.
Yeah, establishing that close relationship. Her key testimony was about an incident back in 2010. Grammy weekend, Beverly Hills Hotel.
What'd you say happened?
She testified she was woken by a little commotion, heard Combs shouting, "Where the F is she?" then yelling and screaming from the bedroom.
So she heard it, didn't see the actual argument.
Correct. She heard it. But then she described seeing Cassie afterwards. Said Cassie was distraught and upset and had visible injuries, a swollen eye, busted lip, and knots on her head.
Wow. That's graphic. And directly supports Cassie's claims about an assault around that time.
Very directly. Morales said she immediately packed Cassie's stuff and took her to her own home for a few days. Got her away from the situation.
Did she mention getting medical help?
Yeah, she said a doctor friend checked Cassie over, was concerned about her stomach and ribs, suggested the ER.
But Cassie didn't go.
Apparently not. Morales testified Cassie refused because she was scared of Diddy finding out or retaliating.
And Morales herself felt scared. Didn't call the police.
Right. Said she feared for her own life, so she didn't involve the police then. She also noted this was the only time between 2007 and 2021 she personally saw injuries on Cassie's face.
That fear aspect, it comes up again. Seems to be a running theme.
It does. Now, the defense cross-examined her too, of course.
What was their approach?
Focused on the fact she only heard the argument, didn't see it happen. Trying to frame her as not a direct eyewitness to the alleged assault itself.
Okay, makes sense. Anything else?
They also brought up her TV appearances, talking about the case, trying to maybe suggest she was seeking attention or profiting from it.
Did she say she got paid?
She admitted getting paid for one photo, a picture with Kim Porter, but denied other payments related to the case itself. The defense also showed a photo of her styling Cassie for a music video later, maybe to show things went back to normal professionally.
So again, trying to undermine credibility, question her motives, highlight she wasn't an eyewitness to the core event.
Exactly. Standard playbook, weaken the corroboration.
Then we had testimony from Frederick Zamore, the general manager of the El Hermitage Hotel in Beverly Hills.
Yeah, this was different. Less about a specific incident, more about Patterns and habits.
Habits related to Combs stays there. He stayed there a lot, apparently.
Frequently, yes. And under aliases.
Yeah.
Jackie Starr, Frank White, Frank Black, Ryan Lopez.
Frank White, Frank Black. Didn't Cassie mention those names?
She did. Linked them specifically to booking rooms for those alleged freak-off encounters.
Okay, so the aliases connect. What else did the hotel manager say? The notes were quite specific, weren't they?
Very specific. Hotel records noted things like always spills candle wax on everything and uses excessive amounts of oil.
Candle wax and oil.
Yeah. And instructions to put the room out of service afterwards for deep cleaning. Another note mentioned excessive amounts of baby oil and wanting the room hot, like 75 degrees.
Huh. Baby oil and candles. That sounds familiar in the context of this case.
Exactly. It ties directly back to the descriptions witnesses, including Cassie, have given of the freak-offs.
Was there anything else in the hotel records about damages?
Yep. An instruction to authorize an extra $1,000 deposit specifically to cover potential room damages when he stayed.
An extra $1,000 just for potential damage.
Seems so. And there was a specific incident noted in January 2010, housekeeping complaint. Large deposits of candle wax on carpets, nightstands, resulted in a $500 charge.
So, tangible records of the mess associated with the candles and presumably the oil.
Right. While Zemmer himself wouldn't know what went on, his testimony about the hotel records the aliases, the specific requests for oil, the wax, the damage charges. It provides a kind of circumstantial corroboration for the descriptions of those alleged encounters.
It paints a picture, even if it's indirect evidence of the events themselves.
Precisely. Adds another layer to the prosecution's narrative.
We also heard briefly from Special Agent Joshua Croft, a computer expert.
Right. Digital forensics. He examined 3 computers belonging to Cassie.
Anything significant found?
Well, one had a user profile named Frank Black.
Frank Black again, one of the aliases used at the hotel.
Exactly. Agent Croft confirmed Cassie gave permission for the searches, and they got a warrant for that specific Frank Black computer.
What about the other computers?
One was apparently reset to factory default settings. Another had that Frank Black profile and a guest profile. And a third one was damaged, wouldn't even turn on.
So digital evidence is definitely part of the investigation. The Frank Black profile is interesting, linking back to the alias.
It confirms they're looking into digital footprints. The reset computer might raise questions, but the Frank Black profile is a concrete link.
Okay, so where does the trial go from here? What's the timeline?
Judge Subramanian mentioned wanting to wrap things up by July 4th.
Ambitious.
Seems like it. But they resumed court on May 27th after the holiday weekend.
Who's expected next?
Capricorn Clark is a name that came up, Combs' former assistant. Apparently, she's the one who might have called Miss Cudi about the break-in.
Ah, so her testimony could be crucial regarding that incident.
Could be. Also expecting some LAPD and LAFD members likely related to the car fire or other incidents. The prosecution says they're on track for their planned 6-week timeline.
So they feel they're moving along as expected.
It seems that way. The judge told the jury they were making great progress before the long weekend.
Good. So just to bring it all back, the big picture here. Combs is facing these really serious federal charges. Sex trafficking, racketeering.
All stemming from that initial civil suit by Cassie Ventura back in November 2023. Allegations of years of abuse being forced into these freak-offs.
Which the prosecution describes as these produced, recorded sex performances Combs directed.
Right. Their theory is a criminal enterprise, using fame, money, threats, violence to control people.
While the defense says, no, this is about isolated domestic violence incidents, not some grand federal conspiracy.
That's the core conflict the jury has to decide on, criminal enterprise or separate incidents. And the testimony has been, frankly, quite graphic at times. Sex, violence, it's heavy stuff.
Definitely. So, recapping day 9, Kid Cudi's story was a big part. The alleged threats, the break-in with the dog detail, the car bombing, that weird, calm denial, and then the later apology.
Plus, Milo Morales, the makeup artist, backing up Cassie's account of injuries after that hotel incident, showing physical evidence, describing Cassie's fear.
And the hotel manager, Zemmour, with those very specific details about aliases, candles, baby oil, and room damage, linking circumstantially to the freak-off allegations.
You see these threads, don't you? Threats, intimidation, control, unusual behavior behind closed doors. It's consistent across several accounts, even if the defense is challenging each one.
It really makes you think. This has been a deep dive into just one day, day 9. But considering all these details that are emerging, the power dynamics described, the alleged coercion, the physical and emotional toll described by witnesses,
Yeah.
what does all this testimony, regardless of the final verdict, really tell us about accountability, especially for powerful figures in industries like entertainment? And how might a trial like this change the conversation moving forward?
That's the big question, isn't it? Definitely something to chew on.
It certainly is. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.